that by modern Gedolim like the Chavetz Chaim?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. The question was, I'm often asked to repeat the questions, that the Torah itself goes out of its way to point out apparent sins of very great people, whether it's the Avos, Avraham going to Mitzrayim, whether it's Moshe hitting the rock, whether it's David HaMelech with Bathsheba, which the Navi even makes it out to be a worse Avera than it actually was. There is no point, there is no desire to cover anything up. Everything is out in the open because we learn from it. And yet we find that when people try to give stories about Gedolim and bring out something negative, they're excommunicated, or we don't talk that way, and we talk about lashon hara. It is a very good question. And in fact, this was the part of an issue. There was a book published a number of years ago, The Making of a Gadol, by Rav Nosson Kamenetsky. Zichrono Livracha is no longer alive, the son of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. And this was a massive book that was very, very interesting. It is very interesting. But he reveals, a side of the yeshiva world that is not always 100% pure. Because he wanted to be honest. And he got in tremendous trouble. Gedolim said, you have to ban the book, you're not allowed to read the book. He then issued a revised edition that took out some of the stuff that was more controversial, and that wasn't good enough. So Rav Nosson was very much against this censorship, but on the other hand, he was makabel, so he would not sell the book in a public way. But I can tell you that in the Svarim stores, the book was going for $25, and once it was banned, somebody put it on eBay for $500. So the truth is, when you ban a sefer, that makes it very, very popular. Everybody wants to get the banned sefer. And now Rav Nosson's cheshbon was that if you understood, listen, it's not that the Gedolim were murderers or rapists, but whatever the Gedolim read novels or whatever, things like that. If you understood the struggles that a great person goes through, and then you understand that they're misgaber over them, that could be a tremendous mussar to you. Meaning, if all I read about is this guy knew Shas at 4 years old, and then 5 years old was Yerushalmi, and 6-year-old was the Eitz Chaim of the Arizal. So I look at those stories, but that has no shaykhs to me. So Rav Nosson's argument is that sometimes it's good to go over the chesronos because we can learn how we can be masak in our own lives. So what was the other cheshbon? And he pointed out that's the derech of the Torah. The Torah itself is megala chesronos, that we should learn from them how to do tshuva, how to be masakein, how to rise above things that drag us down. But many Gedolim, I'm not saying everybody, obviously, but many Gedolim were afraid that this would tarnish their image. And their argument is, maybe, that only God can decide what amount of information can be safely revealed, and within the parameters of human intellect, we are not permitted to kind of reveal chesronos, because we might be doing it more than is necessary, it might be counterproductive and the like. So, if you're asking me, is there a contradiction between the way the Torah describes great people and the way we describe great people in our modern literature? The answer is yes. Avada, it's a very different approach. But there may be an afkamina between HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing it and our doing it, simply because we never really know if we're crossing a line or not. But it's a difficult issue. It's an issue that people grapple with in terms of, for many people, I think it's emes. If I understood, let's say, that a certain gadol had a problem with hasmada, or a certain gadol didn't always make minyan, or a certain gadol had a girlfriend, whatever it would be, would that take away my kavod for that gadol, or would I say, he had those issues, and afilu hachi, he became what he became, maybe that would give me chizuk, maybe that would give me encouragement, right? So that's kind of the fear. Will we lose our respect, or will we gain our respect? Now, the truth of the matter is, in microcosm, this is actually in it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Get this switch. No.
Okay, did we miss all that, or got that? Okay, cool. Thank you. In microcosm, I just want to add, every parent has to go through this. Let's say I have a kid, right? And my kid is having trouble in yeshiva. Or my kid gets caught, with a marijuana cigarette or whatever it is. And let's assume in my lifetime, I am not talking about myself, but in my lifetime, let's assume I had such experiences. So what do I do as a parent? Do I tell my kid, I went through this too, and this is how I got out of it? Or I don't want to tell my kids about the stuff that I did, because maybe they'll lose kibbud of the aim and the like. So the same shaila that you've identified about Gedolim, we actually have to go through as parents. Like, how much of your past do you tell your child? Again, lani estaiti, I think in many, many cases, it could be a gewaldige chizuk for a child to hear that his parent went through similar problems. I think it can give a person a lot of strength, a lot of encouragement. On the other hand, you have to be afraid. You don't want the kid to lose the kavod that he might have for his parent. So that's kind of the issue. Yeah.
Is it to be taken literally when we say that if you speak lashon hara about somebody, you switch like averis and mitzvahs, you get their averis and you give away your mitzvahs? And would that be going against the klal that the only way to lose a mitzvah is to have hara for doing it?
Yeah. So first, I just want to clarify this statement. It's a well-known statement that when you speak lashon hara about somebody, so what happens is you get all of their averos and they get all of your mitzvos, and there's a big switcheroo. Let me point out that is not a chazal. That there is no Gemara that says that. There is no medrash that says that. It's a statement of the Chovos HaLevavos, which is pretty amazing for a rishon to make such a statement, which has no clear makor in chazal. But it is a very famous, very difficult statement of the Chovos HaLevavos. I speak lashon hara about you, so you get all my mitzvahs, I get all your averos. What exactly does that mean? And first of all, how is that fair? I understand that when I speak lashon hara, it's a very serious avera, and I get a very serious avera. Okay, for sure. But why should that mean I get all of your averos, those that I didn't do, or whatever? And why should you get all of my mitzvahs? So the truth is, exactly how you explain it is very, very far from clear. But Rav Dessler and different other svarim that try to be masberit, they do say it's not actually totally literal. In a way, it's easier to understand a little bit why I might get that person's averos on some level. And that is because there is a klal, Elokim Yevakesh es hanerdaf. This is a pasuk in Koheles. Hashem stands to protect the person that is victimized. So if I victimize you by speaking lashon hara, I mavaza you, I humiliated you, I caused you to suffer. So in effect, Hashem will at least take away your averis. That itself will be a kapara. But that doesn't fully explain that, because that might explain why you lose your averos. That doesn't explain why I get your averos. We could just say, theoretically one could have just said, a victim of whom lashon hara is spoken, his averos are taken away. That I could understand, because Elokim Yevakesh says Anirdaf, and the bizayon of being humiliated could be a great, great kapara. But that doesn't explain, why the guy gets hit with it. So it is a very, very difficult statement of the Chovos HaLevavos, and most do not understand it in a completely literal way. Yeah.
So in the laws of shomer Negiah, obviously, like if someone's wearing a shirt or something, it applies. You're not allowed to touch opposite sex. They're wearing a shirt. So the question is, what is the minimum thickness required for shomer Negiah to not apply?
Well, I think the logic would be. Do you feel the flesh? Meaning, if it's thin enough that when I touch it, I feel the skin, so that would be called a violation of Negiah. If they're wearing such a thick padding that you don't really feel the skin, then that would be technically okay. Again, let me just give a little background just for this. The idea of shomer Negiah, let me just mention that there's a fundamental machlokes between Rambam and Ramban. Exactly what does this entail? The Torah says by a nida, Elisha benidas tumasa leisikrivu, meaning by all the arayas it says don't have intercourse, don't have bia. Here it says, don't draw near. So the Rambam, Maimonides, the Rambam learns that this is a love, not only not to have intercourse with a nida, but you're not allowed to do chibuk, hugging, nishuk, kissing, or any type of affectionate connection that could lead to sexual arousal. So, and even though that is only by nida, but the Rambam understands that nida is a binyan av. Nida is a source for all of the arayas. So according to the Rambam, according to the Maimonides, the issur of chibuk, nishuk, Negiah of chiba, Negiah of affection, that's going to be very important, is an issur d'oraisa. Issur d'oraisa. Ramban is cholek. Ramban actually says, d'oraisa, the Torah only prohibits intercourse. So d'oraisa, if you want to hug or kiss a woman, it's going to be legamrei mutter, d'oraisa. But the Rabbanan prohibited it as a gezerah, lest it lead to forbidden intercourse. Right, so this is a big machlokas. Rambam and Ramban is what we call Negiah shel chiba. Is that an issur d'oraisa, or is that only a gezerah? L'maisa, the Shulchan Aruch actually paskins like the Rambam, that we treat it like an issur d'oraisa, and the Ramah is not chaylik there. So the Ramah seems to accept the Mechaber's psak. But here is the kinech. Even if it's an issur d'oraisa, it is only usher if it is called Negiah shel chiba. Negiah shel chiba means touching that expresses affection, love, and that could lead to sexual stimulation. Negiah she'eino shel chiba is vaday not usher d'oraisa. Machlokas et Rabbanan, and many poskim actually say Negiah that's not shel chiba is not even usher d'Rabbanan. So Rav Moshe has a tshuva about riding the subways, the buses. We have the same shaila here. Now in Eretz Yisrael, people tend to be ultra machmir, can't sit next to a woman, etc., etc. But Rav Moshe says, me'ikar hadin. Again, there's numerous chomers a person could have, but me'ikar hadin, this type of incidental bumping into somebody or touching somebody is negiah she'eino shel chiba, which me'ikar hadin is mutter, even midrabanan, and that's also the explanation of a gynecologist. A man is treating woman, a woman is treating man, a physical therapist, and even something that's not so significant, like a barber. Meaning, if one were to ask, according to Rav Moshe, could a man get a haircut from a female barber? Could a woman get a haircut from a man, assuming yichud has to be kept, but assuming the halachas of yichud, any type of professional capacity. It's lav dafka a doctor, where there's more of a need maybe. But any type of professional capacity is considered to be negiah she'eina shel chiba, which me'ikar hadin is mutter. Now, I understand that's not the common practice, and if you went to get a haircut from a female barber, they might kick you out of yeshiva or do worse. Whatever it will be. So I'm not advocating that. I'm not suggesting that you do that. But me'ikar hadin, it would not be usher. Now, the big shaila that comes up in life is shaking hands with women in business meetings or whatever it is. And once again, Rav Moshe himself is machmir on it. But the question becomes, is that considered to be affectionate connection? Or not, because the argument is that ultimately, even though shaking hands is just shaking hands, but shaking hands is expressing friendship. So because it's an expression of friendship, that may lead it to the negiah shel chiba. Or do I say, no, it's just a business thing, it's not an expression of friendship. Again, the Rav Moshe himself mentions that there were many Rabbanim, many German Rabbanim from Ashkenaz, who tended to be Mekel. Many American Rabbanim are in fact Mekel. And Rav Moshe says this would be the svara, but he himself says, kosher lahater. So in spite of Rav Moshe's overall leniency of Negiah she'eino shel chiba, Rav Moshe himself said it's better to be strict. It's difficult to find a clear heter. But still, as I say, there are svaras. One should talk to their posek if they're faced with that situation. But as I say, I'm not here to give you a psak halacha, but just to understand the chiluk between Negiah shel chiba and Negiah not shel chiba. Yeah.
This is coming from one of my friends. It's a little bit difficult to understand how, like, the moral justification for the Jews taking over Eretz Canaan. Eretz Canaan sort of doing its own thing to some degree, and the Jews come in and just wipe them all out. And then, sort of related was, I also kind of struggled to imagine what did war even look like for the Jewish people. You know, it wasn't like we were the Vikings out there, right? You know, like there was, what does it look, what's a holy way to go about wiping out entire society?
Holy way, yeah. Well, it's not easy. So first of all, let me just point out one thing. It's Rashi in this week's Parsha. It says that when Avraham came to Eretz Canaan, so it mentions HaKanani oz b'oretz. The Canaanites were then in the land. So Rashi brings a medrash focusing on the word then, the word az, that originally the land was not the Canaanite land. Originally the land was given to Shem, who was Abraham's ancestor, and the Canaanites from Ham, they conquered it from Shem. So according to at least that medrash that Rashi brings, the Canaanites themselves were conquerors who were being displaced by descendants of the real owners. That is at least one mahalach in Rashi. In fact, people point out there's a little bit of a stira, because in the famous first Rashi, in the beginning of the Torah, right? So Rashi says, it's a medrash, but Rashi brings, Amar of Yitzchak, why does the Torah begin with Bereshis? The Torah is about mitzvahs, so the Torah should have begun with the mitzvahs. HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. So Rashi says, because if the nations of the world will say exactly what you said to the Jewish people, you are thieves, because you took the land away from the 7 nations of Canaan, we can then say, no, God created heaven and earth, and God gave us the land. Now, the Sifsei Chachamim, the Mizrahi, the commentators on Rashi, actually ask, there's a stira, because Rashi, the first Rashi, is implying, exactly as your question, that we took it from the Canaanites, but it was okay because it was Al Pi Hashem, who owns everything. The second Rashi in this week's Parsha is saying the other way around. It was Zaro Shel Shem originally, and the Canaanites took it. Right? So Rashi, there are 2 different approaches that Rashi himself brings, one in Parshas Bereshis and one in Parshas Lech Lecha. But that would bring me to the second answer, and the second answer would be, now I know this is going to be circular when you're talking to, because he says, well, it's legitimate because God gave it to us. Meaning, you can't ask the question, meaning, what is the morality of taking it from the Canaanites? Because God said it was given to us. Now I understand the circularity of the statement, because everybody else is going to say the same thing. The difference is, God really did say it to us. Okay, but how do you convince somebody? I mean, obviously, they'll say, well, God said it to us. Okay, I don't know. I don't have a clear answer. But at least theologically, we would not be allowed to do this without the authorization of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So essentially, that kind of answers the moral issue. Now, how do you conduct wars? So it's really very, very, very difficult. When a person learns the book of Yoshua, we actually spent some time learning the book of Yoshua here. Very, very hard. I mean, you know, we talk about, today we condemn genocide and all sorts of things, and Hashem commands you, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, you eradicate the Canaanite nations, man, woman, child, lo sechaye kol neshama, do not let a single person live. So you're eradicating whole populations. So one partial answer is that according to the Rambam's Shita in Hilchos Malachim, things are not quite as bad as it seems. According to the Rambam, even vis-a-vis the 7 nations of Canaan, we are obligated to offer them shalom before we wage war. Kriyat shalom, we offer them peace. What is peace? they must accept the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, not become Jewish, accept the 7 mitzvahs of Noach. They must accept Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel. And essentially, they accept a subordinate position. Now, and that's called the Ger Toshav. They have rights to tzedakah, they have rights to get the benefits of society, but they must accept the Jewish sovereignty. It is only, according to the Rambam, it is only when they refuse to accept Shalom that we are then given a mitzvah to eradicate them. And even then, they are given an opportunity to leave. So there's really 2 options that occur before we do the genocide. Option number 1, you can take it in any order you want, is just get out. Okay? Option number 2 is make shalom on these terms. If they don't get out and they don't make shalom, then the Torah says they are to be eradicated. Now, that is why we actually find, according to the Rambam, throughout Nach, we find Chitim and Canaanites like still hanging around. And apparently they had the status of Gerei Toshaf. So according to the Rambam, I'm not saying this eliminates all of the moral problems people have, but it makes it a lot easier because essentially there are a number of options in which they would not have to be eradicated. They could make shalom. Now the problem is this works according to the Rambam Shita in Kriyas Shalom. According to Rashi's Shita, it's very, very different. Rashi, both in the Chumash and in Maseches Saita, understands that we offer the opportunity of shalom or flight, only before we cross the Yarden. These were advanced letters that Yoshua sent. Once we cross the Yarden and we don't have shalom or flight, we no longer accept any type of peace treaty. We immediately go to the eradication. So like Rashi, it is a little more difficult about genocide and the like. And of course, you have the same problem with Amalek and everything else. But one analogy to keep in mind, there was a famous author, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Roald Dahl, D-A-H-L. If you ever saw, as a kid, Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory or something, he was the author of the children's book that was based on. But he wrote a little bit of a short story about a doctor who was called to save baby Hitler's life. And he was describing a scene about a mother whose baby was so sick, and the mother loved the child. And she begged the doctor to take care of the baby. This is her only simcha, her only joy in life, is this cute little baby. And let's assume, the story ended with this, let's assume you had a moment of absolute clarity, which is totally hypothetical. You're not a Navi. Absolute clarity that this kid is going to grow up to be the person who murders 6 million Jews and millions of other people. And you knew that for a certainty. What is the compassionate thing to do? You have a mother who's crying and begging, and the baby is suffering so much. So your instinct would be to save the baby. But you know, I save the baby, I'm enabling the murder of millions and millions of people. If I'm motivated out of rachamim, I would kill the baby right away. Now, this is totally theoretical because none of us are in a position to ever know that. So we have to look at the here and now. A baby suffering, I don't make a judgment that the baby's going to grow up to be a Rasha. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu does know that. So some want to understand that the notion of the genocide of Amalek, the genocide of the 7 nations, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu essentially telling us these are going to grow up to be the Hitlers. These are going to grow up to be the people that are going to do much more damage. So you think it's compassionate to keep them alive? in the long run, you're creating a world of devastation, a world of destruction, a world of murder, a world of idolatry. So essentially, I think the Roald Dahl story kind of gives you a little bit of a picture of how we can morally justify the genocide. But again, you understand the problem. The problem one is that you're dealing with a premise that the other side won't accept, meaning God is telling us such and such. Well, I mean, every terrorist says, God is telling them something. And what's our answer? Well, God really didn't tell you that. But God really told us that. Well, once again, that argument will go back and forth forever and ever. But at least mitzidenu, our answer is, yeah, Hashem said it. And if Hashem said it, then it's going to be true. So it is, these are issues that we grapple with, but at least if you go through the different shitos, you may see, at least according to the Rambam especially, it is not quite as devastating as an extreme as it would be. Huh?
Just because this is also something that I think a lot of people don't have an idea on. Were Jews, but it could have been, were there Jews in these wars who were, bloodthirsty, who were just enjoying the blood of the war? Because you have people like that in all wars, of course, which takes, that's something people grapple with.
Well, it could be, but I will tell you an interesting comment of the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh says on the pasuk, when Hashem talks about fighting wars, and Hashem promises us victory, so it says, "V'nasan lecha rachamim," He will give you mercy, v'richamecha, and He will have mercy on you. So the Orach Chaim says, there's a repetition. He will give you mercy. He will be merciful to you. What's the repetition? So the Orach Chaim says, it's not repetition. Two different things. The second statement is, God will show you mercy, that you'll be victorious. That's the second statement. The first statement is making another point. And that is, when you engage in war, and you engage in violence, and you engage in killing, even if it's totally justifiable, it can do something to your character. You might develop a bloodthirstiness. You might develop a taste for violence and control. So God's promise is, "V'nasan lecha rachamim," He will give you mercy. It doesn't mean God will show you mercy. It means He will give you the ability to hold on to your mercy in spite of the violence that you're engaged in. And that is indeed a very, very difficult challenge. One of the open secrets of the past 2 years within the Army is that, Baruch Hashem, I wouldn't say it's a huge number, but it's more than you would think. There have been many, many suicides. Many soldiers on the Israeli side have taken their own lives. I myself, a few months ago, was at a funeral, which was a suicide, but nobody talked about it. I mean, the people who knew were whispering, but... and one of the maspidim, it was a religious funeral, but one of the maspidim was a soldier who kept on, and if you didn't know the context, you wouldn't know what he's talking about. He says, there's some difficult issues here that have to be discussed. We have to discuss it. We have to talk about it. We can't sweep it under the rug. But he didn't say what it was. But he kept on saying as if everybody understood what the discussion was. And simply this, to go into violence and to engage in killing, it affects you in a tremendous way. It can affect your character. It can erode your midos. It can give you a sense of despondency that you're no longer the person you were. And God forbid you could take your own life. So God's promise was that at least in those righteous wars, we would keep our sense of rachamim. And that's a very, very big, very, very big challenge. Yeah.
You look like that we have to wear different shoes when we're davening. It seems to be confusing when you look at the psukim, Hashem tells Moshe to take his shoes off at the bush. He has the Kohen not to wear shoes, and Mikdash. So, like, why are these two different cases?
Right, this is a very interesting question. Normally, we say that one is supposed to wear shoes when they daven, if that is the custom of how you appear before a king or an important person. Meaning, if the custom is to go barefoot, you are allowed to be barefoot. But generally speaking, in modern times, unless you live in Africa or something, the custom is you would not go to the prime minister barefoot. So one should therefore wear shoes or whatever it will be. Now the question becomes, well, yeah, but we actually find that taking off your shoes is a sign of reverence and respect. Moshe Rabbeinu was told by the burning bush, by the sneh, Shal na'alecha mi'al raglecha, take your shoes off your feet because you're standing in a holy place. And in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim did all of the avodah without shoes. They were not allowed to wear shoes. In fact, that's why it mentions one of the reasons why Kohanim often were sick. They had to do the avodah. And remember, most of the avodah was outdoors, right? Because the korbanos, right? You have to remember this. The big mizbeach upon which the korbanos were brought was not in a roofed building. That's the heichal. That had the mizbeach of ketores and the menorah and the shulchan. But the mizbeach of all the korbanos was an open air courtyard. So Kohanim were facing rain and wind and cold and snow, and they were barefoot, and they couldn't wear sweaters because they could only wear big dekudah. They couldn't wear extra garments. They couldn't wear gloves, and in addition, they ate these heavy meals of meats, the chatas and the asham and everything else. So the Gemara says Kohanim were subject to cholei me'ayim. They often had digestive sicknesses, stomach aches, or whatever it is, precisely because of it. But your question basically is, though, okay, fine. So on one hand, we say it's respectful to wear shoes. On the other hand, we say it's an honor to God, Kadosh Baruch Hu, not to wear shoes, and the like. It is a good question. Obviously, it's an inconsistency. But I think the difference would be that in an ideal way, in an ideal sense, the reverence to Hashem is not wearing shoes. But the problem is, when I'm not in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's miyuchadika place, then when I don't wear shoes, it doesn't look as if I'm showing kavod to Hashem. It looks as if I'm being overly casual. So, in a sense, when it's not within the confines of the very specific avodah of the Beis HaMikdash, you have to be worried about not being too relaxed in serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it is an interesting question. Yeah.
So Mishnah Pirke Avot says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created from the beginning of time 10 things that would be nisim that would eventually carry itself out. And one of those things is Bilam's donkey. So two questions. Number one, why did Hashem need to have created them from the beginning of time? And number two, according to the Rambam, that Bilam's donkey, the whole situation over there was just a nevuah. It didn't actually happen. So what is this Mishnah saying?
Yeah. So the Mishnah mentions certain things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created from the very beginning, technically Bein Hashmashos, as you're leaving Friday going into Shabbos. So at the very end of the creation, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made certain miraculous things, the staff of Moshe, the ability of the donkey to talk, the Korach, the ground opening up for Korach. So to take the second question first, it is known that the Rambam's shita in the Moreh Nevuchim is that some of the things that are considered to be impossible were really in the nature of dreams. So Bilam, there was not an actual donkey that was talking. The Rambam says this was a chalom, this was a quasi-prophetic vision that Bilam had, but an actual donkey did not talk. Now, of course, the Rambam has a lot of problems here because the Rambam does not deny that there are some miracles that did happen, Kriyas Yamsuf and the like. So you're going to have to try to analyze, well, why is Kriyas Yamsuf a miracle that could and did actually happen, while the talking of the donkey, is something that didn't actually happen? But be it as it may, it's clear that the Rambam is not trying to explain the Mishnah. The Rambam is moda that the Mishnah itself is cholek in his yesod. His yesod was based on other rayas from other chazal. So you're right. The Mishnah contradicts the Rambam's hanocha. But the question becomes the first question. So let's assume that Bilam's donkey did talk. Right, take it literally. Why did Hashem have to create at the very beginning of time? So this goes back a little bit to another yesod of the Rambam, and this yesod the Rambam does put into the Mishnah. The Rambam understands that based on the verse in Keheles, Ein kol chodosh tachas hashemesh. What does Shlomo HaMelech say? There is nothing new. Everything has to be built into the creation. That even miracles, which are deviations from the laws of nature, have to be built into the very creation of those laws of nature. Meaning, if Hashem would have made, let's say, donkeys can't talk, he would not, well, I can't say he would not have been able, he could do what he wants, but he would not be Meshana, his existing teva, by making a donkey talk. Elamai, he had to build into the creation of the donkey that there will be one donkey that will be given a koach hadibar. And therefore the Rambam's overall approach to that Mishnah in Pirke Avot is what you might call the pre-programmed nature of miracles. So they're built into the framework of creation, so they are not considered to be deviations from creation, but they are part and parcel of the anomaly, so to speak, that Hashem put into the world. So that would be the explanation of that idea. But they're put bein hashmashos because the first 6 days are the laws of nature, and at the very, very end, he pre-programmed the different miracles that are deviations from the law of nature, but they are still part of the natural process because they've been programmed into the program. So that's how the Rambam works. Yeah.
I was listening to some of the Rav's latest shiurim on Chas Mason. I was wondering, we went through different shittas, the Rambam, the Aliyah. I was wondering that if there's such fundamental premises and they're so strict to our religion and where we're going and where's it all going and what's going to happen after the afterlife and the details of Moshiach and Olam Haba, how could there be such variety and such machlokes in between something so fundamental to
Yeah. So a little background for people if you're not familiar. We do believe in both something called Olam Haba and something called Techiyas HaMesim. And the question is, what are the definitions and what are the distinctions between Olam Haba and Techiyas HaMesim? So I'm going to start first with the Ramban, because the Ramban sheet is actually the mainstream explanation that we commonly give, so that'll be more familiar to you. Then I'll mention the Rambam as a little different. When a person dies, and whatever, they get purified in Gehenna, whatever it is, but they eventually go to a spiritual realm, which there's no physicality, there's no body, it is only connection to God. And the Ramban does not call that Olam Haba. The Ramban calls that Gan Eden, or Olam HaNeshamos, that is the world of the soul. But the world of the soul is not eternal. According to Ramban, the world of the soul is a beautiful, beautiful existence, but it is only temporary until HaKadosh Baruch Hu restores the soul within the body. For Techiyas HaMesim, in which body and soul are nana mizif hashchina. So according to the Ramban, Techiyas HaMesim is the end process that will last forever and ever. Olam HaNeshamos is not forever. Techiyas HaMesim is forever. And according to Ramban, Techiyas HaMesim is what we mean by the word Olam Haba. So according to Ramban, Olam Haba and Techiyas HaMesim are the same thing, and they are the end stage. They are the culmination of the process. The spiritual Olam HaNeshamas, or Gan Eden, is a limited duration that will simply stop existing once there's Techiyas HaMesim, or maybe to describe it another way, it will exist with the body in the eternal world. Now that is the Shita of Ramban. The Shita of the Rambam is very different. The Shita of the Rambam is the Olam HaNeshamais that a person goes to when he dies. That is what we call Olam Haba. And that is forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And even though there will be a Techiyas HaMesim, the Techiyas HaMesim itself is temporary. The souls will go back into the bodies for a while. Then they're going to die. And where do they go back to? They go back to Olam Haba. So according to the Rambam, Techiyas HaMesim is very ephemeral. In fact, it's even hard to know what the purpose is. Okay, we could be marach on that. But it is not the end. It is not the end reward. According to the Rambam, Maimonides, the only end reward is the Olam HaNeshamais, an Olam without Gashmias, without Achila, without Shtia. So the question that was asked is that, these are fundamental aspects of Jewish faith, and if there's such a disagreement about fundamental aspects, and I just mentioned two, I mentioned Rambam and Ramban, there are other variations as well, then how could a person be firm in their emunah, firm in their belief system, if there's so much uncertainty on such basic informational levels? I think the short answer is that, as similar to what I said this morning about actually much harder questions about Bechira and God's Hashgacha Pratis, is that on a day-to-day basis, these things, we don't have to have definitive answers to this. Meaning to say, I know that Hashem will give eternal reward for his mitzvahs. Whether that will take the form of the world of the soul or a soul within a body, there are different opinions based on different sources in Chazal, and the short answer is we don't know. But that doesn't detract from the fundamental idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give eternal sechar for mitzvahs, and there will be punishments for averos. So as long as one has that basic orientation, the particular details can be subject to a big machlokas rishonim. But part of the problem is this, though. The Rambam counts Techiyas HaMesim as one of the Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah, one of the 13 principles of faith. The Rambam then says, if you deny one of the 13 principles of faith, you don't have a share in Olam Haba. Interestingly enough, the Rambam was accused of denying Techiyas HaMesim because he doesn't look at it as something eternal. So the Rambam was accused of being an apikaris by not believing in one of his own Ikrei Emunah. And the Rambam's defense was, no, I believe in Techiyas HaMesim as I defined it. It's temporary. Well, the Ramah, you heard of the Yad Ramah, one of the great Rishonim, the Yad Ramah. In fact, if you look at the Yad Ramah on Sanhedrin, we have a Yad Ramah on two Masechtas, on Bava Basra and on Sanhedrin. So now Sanhedrin has Perek Chelek, which talks about Olam Haba and Techiyas HaMesim. So at the end of the Yad Ramah of Sanhedrin, there is a whole, in the newer editions, that is, there's a whole section of letters that the Ramah wrote in a huge machlokas with the Rambam over Techiyas HaMesim, where the Ramah takes the Ramban's position that Techiyas HaMesim is eternal, and he basically considered the Rambam to be a kaifer, in Ikrei Emunah. So that's where you get into a problem. So in many ways, Rav Yosef Albo solved the problem by basically saying, as long as you believe in three things, you're not a kaifer. The three things is our Mitzias Hashem, there's God, reward and punishment, and Torah min hashamayim. So, if I believe in reward and punishment, it makes no difference. Is it Techiyas HaMesim this, Olam Haba is this. So like the Yad Ramah, you don't really have a heresy problem. You believe in the three Ikrei Emunah. On the other hand, I have to say that both the Rambam and the Ramah did not go with Rav Yosef Albo's Hanacha, and they considered a denial of Techiyas HaMesim to be kfira. So then you get into a real conundrum, because the way the Rambam defines Techiyas HaMesim is kfira according to the definition of the way the Ramah defined Techiyas HaMesim. So it was a problem. There were those that considered the Rambam to be a kaifer, and the Rambam wrote a whole letter called Igeres Techiyas HaMesim, but essentially he didn't really answer the Ramah's shita. He just says, I don't learn like you, the Ramah. But when you get into a Inyanim of kfira, it gets very, very delicate, because people, the words are the same, but the concepts are different. I mean, the Ramah says, you have to be maimin in Techiyas HaMesim, or you're a kaifer. And the Rambam says the same thing. You have to be maimin in Techiyas HaMesim, or you're a kaifer. So superficially, they say the same thing. But not really. The way the Rambam defines Techiyas HaMesim, the Ramah says is a kfira, right? So that's you get into a real difficulty there. Yeah.
It seems from the story with Hannah and Eli that it wasn't normal to daven quietly. So what changed that these days?
Yeah, this is actually a very, very good question. The Gemara in Brachos, the fifth parak of Brachos, learns out many of the halachos of how you daven from the behavior of Hannah when she came to the Mishkan of Shiloh to pray for a child. And that's how we know that you daven silently, because it mentions that Hannah's lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Now, your kasha is a very good kasha. If the Gemara would have simply said, since Hannah's lips did not make noise, we learn that you daven silently, that wouldn't have been a kasha, because that wouldn't have meant she was changing anything. Maybe it's just telling us that's the way people davened. So, be'etzem, deriving something from Hannah, does not in and of itself mean it was a new thing. But the narrative indicates it was a new thing, because it says when Eli sees this woman moving her mouth and not making a noise, the pasuk says Eli thought she was drunk. Meaning that's not the way people pray to Hashem. People pray to Hashem out loud. What is the stuff the woman is doing? So then, your kasha is a very excellent kasha. If indeed, until Chana, the derech of Tefillah may have been louder, and Chana somehow innovated that the derech to pray to Hashem should be silent, and Chazal then say, we follow Chana's model for how we daven. So the question becomes, Taka, what changed? Meaning, what changed? Meaning, why? What? Until Chana? Well, did everybody get it wrong? Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. When it says Avraham was Masakin Shachris, Yitzchak was Masakin Mincha, Yaakov was Masakin Marav. Avada, that doesn't mean the Nusach. I mean, I'm not suggesting Avraham Avinu daven Shmona Esrei. He did not. His tefillah was his own words. Okay, that's pashut. But did Avram do it silently, or did Avram do it loud? The implication was, did it loud? Because that's why Chana was unusual. So the question was, if Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu davened out loud, then what changed that Chana would say that we should daven in a more sanua way, in a more private way, a more quiet way? Very, very excellent question. But it could be that this was a measure of Yeridas Hadoros, because the notion of davening quietly to God is that when one approaches Hashem, although Hashem loves our tefillos, but one should have a certain fear that I'm not worthy of speaking to Hashem. And when you're in a matzav of yira, so your voice goes low. You don't shout like, "Hey God, how you doing today?" It's more of a reverential thing. So it could be that this was nichlal in niskatnu hadairis, as the dairis became less and less worthy. They were not as great as the avos, as Moshe Rabbeinu. There needed to be a greater humility in how you approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that could have been the inyan of tefillah balachash. That's one mahalach. Another way of learning it, which I think is more daichik, but it might work, is that when Eli thought she was a shikaira, maybe it was not because she was davening silently. Maybe we always daven silently, but rather her mouth was moving in an unusual way. There was a certain intensity in her movements that looked funny, looked strange. In other words, we derive from her that you daven silently, but not that she was mechadesh it. And the fact that he thought she was a shikara was mitam acher, the bizarreness of the intensity of the movements. That might be maybe a simpler pshat. Yeah.
In some earlier posts, and I think it's still a commonly held opinion, but I see that in particular in the Shach, there's a lot of caution around learning hidden areas of Torah, especially for somebody who's not so learned and accomplished. And I think these days and in more recent times, a lot of people are somewhat open to learning and disseminating hidden parts of the Torah.
Yeah.
Was there a change in attitude, and what is the appropriate?
Well, there definitely is a change of attitude, but there are actually reasons for it. The reference you're talking about is the great reluctance that has been expressed over many, many centuries of not learning and certainly not spreading teachings of the hidden part of the Torah that we call Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical doctrines, whether it be the Zohar, whether it be the writings of the Ari, and the later writings of the Mekubalim, and in different communities there were different rules about it. Some communities had a cherem, an excommunication, that you were not allowed to learn Kabbalah till you were 40, until you were married, and until you had filled your belly with Shas and Poskim, so you had a very, very solid knowledge of Torah, because otherwise you could be led astray. Now, to a large degree, this is actually based on statements in the Gemara itself. The Gemara in Chagigah talks about learning the secret parts of Torah, and it mentions that certain things can only be given to great Talmidei Chachamim and the like, because the Hamonam is going to misunderstand it. So to some degree it's rooted in Chazal. In another sense, it was born out of very, very difficult experiences, such as Shabsai Tzvi, the false Mashiach, who attracted thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews. A lot of it was based on their connection to Kabbalah, where they read different simanim, and they said he's Mashiach and the like, and that devastated them, both economically, but more importantly, spiritually, right? So some of it was very pragmatic. On the other hand, the Vilna Gaon himself, who was a phenomenally great Mekubal, besides everything else, actually writes that as we approach Yemosa Mashiach, it's going to be more and more necessary for the Jewish people to access the hidden light that is in the inner parts of the Torah. And he says the Geula will come only through the learning of the Pnimius, the inner dimension of the Torah. So the question is, how do you reconcile these two ideas that people are told, stay away unless you're a great Talmid Chacham, versus the notion that to bring the Geula, we have to be connected to the Pnimius HaTorah? And the answer is there are many, many different levels, meaning to say, everybody, and Rav Chaim Volozhiner says this himself, the Talmud of the Gra, everybody should have a basic exposure to the basic concepts of Kabbalah. It should be part of your education to learn it from a reliable and authoritative Rebbe, authoritative source, and to kind of have a basic sense of idea. But when they say you shouldn't do it unless you're a tzaddik and unless you're pure and unless you're filled yourself with Shas and Poskim, that's referring to deeper levels of Kabbalah that can be very, very dangerous to a person. They can actually be dangerous. We actually have a history of great Mekubalim dying very young. Now, granted, I can't say there's a definitive cause and effect, but one has to be a little suspicious. The Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero, died at 48. The Arizal died at 39. The Ramchal also died before the age of 40. So, interesting. You're not supposed to learn Kabbalah until you're 40. These great Mekubalim, Ramchal and Arizal, died before the age of 40. Rabbi Yair Kaplan, who was a Mekubal, he was Isaac in Kabbalah a lot, died also young. I don't remember exactly how old, but it was before the age of 50, that's for sure. He left, I think, 10 children, an almana with 10 children. What is so dangerous about Kabbalah? Why would Kabbalah cause you to have premature death? So it's very, very fascinating. When you really, really connect to it on a deep level, your neshama is margish, a kesher to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in an unbelievable way. The neshama leaves the body. It leaves the body. You have, in fact, there are people who can describe this from the Sitra Achra, that people will say, people who are into heavy meditation, will describe out-of-body experiences. There is such a phenomenon. And Rav Aryeh Kaplan writes in one of his books that if you're going to do this heavy Kabbalistic meditation, you got to have a buddy system. It's like going swimming in a dangerous place. You got to have a buddy in case you're getting too far out there. It gives you a slap, bring you back to earth. So my totally non-provable speculation is that Rabbi Kaplan perhaps may have had something like that, kind of an out-of-body thing, where the neshama kind of left and didn't come back. So it is dangerous, but as I say, on the level of basic exposure, it is actually very, very positive, and that's what the Vilna Gaon is saying. Chassidus, to a large degree, one of the things Chassidus did, it did many things, but one of the things Chassidus did was to popularize many esoteric teachings of Kabbalah and make them more accessible to human understanding. So he said, for like the Tanya. Now, Tanya, I'm not going to say is an easy work, but in terms of Kabbalah, it is a simplification of very, very deep teachings of Kabbalah in a way that is more accessible to human understanding. And that's what a lot of Hasidus does. So you could be Yotze, your Kabbalah requirement. I'm not sure if the Vilna Gaon would approve. When the Vilna Gaon says Geula comes only through limud of Kabbalah, perhaps you could be Yotze, your Kabbalah obligation, through Sifrei Hasidus or the like. Yeah.
So obviously, like when somebody dies, a marriage is invalidated if they're married. So the question is, resurrection of the dead. First part, are people going to be remarried to who they were married to when they were alive? And second question, what does Yaakov do? Because he can't marry both his wives anymore because they were sisters. Yeah, very excellent question. So there is a shaila in Poskim about Eishes Eliyahu. Eliyahu Hanavi was the only person who didn't die. He physically went up to Shemayim. So is his wife allowed to marry anybody? Technically, his wife was not widowed. The implication is, though, that that's only true with Eliyahu Hanavi. Anyone else who physically dies, the marriage is severed. Now, if that's the case, there seems to be no automatic reason why the marriage would be reinstituted by resurrection of the dead. So presumably, they'd have to make a new kedushin. They'd have to make a new marriage. Now, this gets very complicated when you consider reincarnation and the like, because I've been through 5 different bodies, right? So if we're the same, meaning my wife has been through 5, I've been through 5, so now we're both in the 5th stage, so we get reunited. But what if she's 4, but she had 1 after me? It is a complicated issue of how reincarnation works in terms of marriage, but there would have to be a new kedushin. Now with Yaakov, you're raising an interesting question, right? Yaakov Avinu married 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. Actually, some say 4 sisters, some say Bilhah and Zilpah were sisters as well. But he at least married 2 sisters. Now the Torah itself prohibits marrying 2 sisters, Elamai, but Yaakov was before Matan Torah. Okay, so that's good.
when Yaakov married them. But if you're talking about after Tchias HaMesim, where certainly the Torah was given already, how can Yaakov marry two sisters? Will he be able to marry Rachel and Leah? So the truth is, there's a vast amount of talk we can devote to that. Number one, there is actually a machlokas in the Gemara. Are mitzvos going to apply at all after Techias HaMesim? Because Techias HaMesim, like the Ramban, is like Olam Haba. So if the mitzvos don't apply, then you're not going to have a problem.
Isn't that disregarding the Torah, which you're not allowed to do?
Well, the Maral says that only applies in the world prior to resurrection. Resurrection is a new Olam. Okay, so that's one idea. The other idea is that even going back to Yaakov at his time, there are many other answers for how Yaakov could marry two sisters. Among them was when they converted to the Jewish teachings, a ger is no longer related. They severed their relationship to each other, right? So that would be another answer. So that would apply equally later, because once they converted, they are no longer sisters in any sense. Yeah.
As I was davening the Yom Kippur davening, I was paying attention to as far as Spartan, we say that we talked about the Tefillah that Kohen Gadol had going to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And it's like the holiest place, the holiest time of the year and everything. And I found it to be very interesting the things that he davens for. When he goes into he has those literally few minutes, in the holy space, and he davens for they seem almost like arbitrary. Like one is like, you should listen to the people davening for the rain, I think it was, or stop all the God. Another one was that no woman should miscarry. And I think the third one was that they don't need parnasa from one each other.
Right.
I think there is in the greater scheme of like Jewish problems, there's so much more to daven for. What's the common thread there?
Yeah. So this is the question of the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, and he brought the incense. He didn't actually daven in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. When he went out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so the Mishnah says he gave a tefillah kitzara. He davened a very short tefillah, and the reason it was short was very specific, not to scare, because if he would be gone for too long, people would worry that he died. So he did quickly, so he would be able to have people see him. Now, in that tefillah kitzara, the Mishnah itself does not say what it was, but the Gemara says it. And actually, the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, they have different nuschos, and even in the Machzor, there are different nuschos between the Ashkenazi Seder Avoda and the Kohen Gadol's Seder Avoda. By the way, a little difference is the Sephardi Seder Avoda has the prayer in the right place. The Kohen Gadol brought the Torah, and then he said the prayer. Ashkenazi don't have the prayer. They say at the end of the Avodah, they say, and this is what the Kohen Gadol said when he left the Kodesh HaKadoshim. In other words, the prayer is Shalom B'mkomo. And anyway, the prayer that the Ashkenazi Paytan says is a made-up prayer. It's an aleph-based prayer. Aleph-based, it's Vada was not the prayer that the Kohen Gadol says. So maybe that's why they move it to the end. But the question that's being raised is that you'd figure this is such an awesomely holy moment that you'd pray for the biggest, most important things. And some of the things seem to be, relatively small. It says that Hashem, in fact, it's a prayer not to listen to a prayer. Don't listen to the prayer of people who are traveling on the roads that there shouldn't be rain, because they don't want to be caught in the mud. Don't listen to their prayer. Women shouldn't have miscarriages. But I think there's an important lesson here, and that is, sometimes a leader of a nation thinks the only thing that's important are big issues that pertain to the whole nation. What happens to Reuven, Shimon? I mean, they're cogs in the wheel. They're not really important. And maybe the Tefillah wanted to emphasize exactly at that time, hey, Kohen Gadol, it's not just the nation. Think about individual people, the struggles they go through. as Rav Moshe Scherer used to say about Gudas Yisrael. He says, we have to worry not only about Klal Yisrael, but Reb Yisrael, the regular, And it is important that a leader not lose sight of the individual struggles that people go through.
Classify me as not the Torah, but I'm why do we still eat, gefilte fish and our cholent? I mean, one is like where do we get it from?
Yeah.
And two, like if we have better things, if we're not all where we were in Europe, then why don't we move past it?
Well, listen, I'm not going to say, although there is a Balamor, the Balamor actually writes, if a person doesn't eat chamin on Shabbos, if you don't eat warm food on Shabbos, something hot on Shabbos, Sorech B'dika, we have to check if he's an apikaris, because remember, because the Canaanites took the position you weren't allowed to have fire in your house at all on Shabbos, so they sat in darkness. So we make a point of eating something hot, but the truth is, it can even be a cup of tea. It doesn't have to be shown, but something hot, in order to show that we reject the Canaanite position. So that has something very significant. Gefilte fish, as you know, was invented to make a fish product that doesn't have bones in it, so you don't have a problem of borer, of separating the bones. So they were halachic foods that were created. But, eating them is not an article of faith. I mean, you don't have to do that if you don't like cholent, you don't like gefilte fish. You're not an apikoros. Although, who knows, I think some Beis Yaakos might not accept your daughter, because they actually ask, somebody told me this, in some of the application forms, what soup does your mother serve Friday night? And if it's like vegetable or barley mushroom, may not be able to get in the Beis Yaakov and the like. So there's something like that. But as they say, so it's not a chiyuv really. And the ikar of Oneg Shabbos is that you eat the things that you enjoy because that's how you honor Hashem. But there is something to be said for tradition, meaning if these were the foods that were eaten, at least by Ashkenazi communities, again, not Dafka Sephardim, but within the Ashkenazi world, these were the foods that were eaten, there is something to connect yourself to what your grandparents ate, your great-grandparents ate. So there is something to be connected. When I lived in Chicago, anyone here from Chicago? Oh, yeah, as you know, Devon Avenue. So when I lived in Chicago, Devon Avenue was totally Jewish. Now it's mainly Indian. There's still some Jewish stuff there. So there was a famous treif, kosher-style deli called the Bagel. Totally treif, but it was, Jewish food. So I remember, I was like 22 at the time, a real long time ago. I was walking by and I saw a sign in the restaurant, a Shabbos. It says, we give a free glass of wine for every order of cholent. Meaning, I go in on Shabbos and I order the cholent, they're going to give me Manischewitz, wine for what? So I was thinking to myself then, what a superficial Judaism this is, gastronomic Judaism. The guy goes in and he pays money and it's a treif restaurant. All right, the wine is kosher, Manischewitz, okay. But he thinks he's keeping Shabbos, he's celebrating Shabbos because he has a glass of wine and cholent, and somehow that's keeping Shabbos, right? So superficial, meaningless. But as I get older, I think to myself, there may be something to it. Because he remembers his grandfather used to mumble some words over a glass of wine. And he remembers that his grandmother made this thing that smelled really, really good. And there's something in his neshama that wants to connect to it. He doesn't know the halachas, he doesn't know what Shabbos is, he doesn't know what Kiddush is even. But the cholent and the wine is some gesture that he wants to make to connect. So it's not the end point, but it might be the beginning of something, right? So That's what I was saying. I think there is some value to the sentimentality of connecting to those foods, but it's not an article of faith. Don't worry about it. There are many, many other ways you can become an apikoros. Yeah.
Nowadays, you have people running around screaming "Mishiyesh lo smartphone, hukas misken," and Stam across.
Oh yeah, it's kind of a jaunty niggin. Yeah.
And Stam in the yeshivish world, smartphones are really not accepted.
Yeah.
And this includes even filtered smartphones, I believe.
Yeah.
For the most part. But you do see, at least in Israel, like all the calls are filled with people with laptops.
I'm sorry, other people what?
People with laptops.
Yes,
Everybody
laptops,
has
yeah.
laptop typing of confusion. So I was wondering why are smartphones looked at so terribly that even if it's filtered, the amount is like almost like excommunicated.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Now there are people, of course, who are against the internet, and some are even against a minority, a laptop without an internet, which I don't know what the problem is. It's no different than a typewriter, but on the other hand, you're right. I mean, many people who are willing to work with a filtered internet on an office computer or a laptop say smartphone is chutz l'machana. No way you're allowed to have it. Although many people do have two phones. Okay, that's another issue. I don't know. Some of it is not fully rational, but I would think that maybe a smartphone, because it's smaller, you can hide what you're doing easier. So you can see movies, you can see all sorts of... I mean, you're doing a laptop obviously too, but in a laptop, it's a bigger thing, so people are more likely to maybe know what you're doing, unless you're doing it totally privately. So, and also texting. Texting is, of course, on a laptop you do email, but whatever, but texting is considered to be... I don't know why exactly, but texting is considered to be very, very evil, very, very bad. So I don't know. I mean, the truth is, I am, for good or for bad, I'm an American Rav. So people will say Kalos Reich, but I don't have the same visceral disgust to smartphones and other things. I think they're tools, and the tools can be misused, and the tools can be very dangerous. I'm not denying that. The tools could destroy your ruchnius, for sure. On the other hand, they are tools. They are tools that can be used in good ways as well. So I don't feel the compulsion that I have to physically eradicate all of these phones from creation. And I will add, I do only have a Mahadran phone. I do not have two phones, so I'm not speaking out of my own self-interest. But still, I don't think it's the worst crime in the world. It's hard to know exactly what gets people so upset about different things at different times. But in many, many ways, Rabbi Yashiv, Zichrono Livracha, when he was alive, they wanted him to sign a hachraza to asur the internet. A religious Jew should not use the internet. And he refused. He says, what am I going to tell people? I mean, you can get divrei Torah from the internet, so many shiurim, you could look up svarim, HebrewBooks.org, you get 50,000 svarim, Oitzer HaChochma, what are you going to say? So Rabbi Yashiv said, you have to have filters, you have to have warnings, you have to be responsible, but he's not going to answer it. I mean, should I answer a car? Some people say, yeah, by the way. Should I answer a car because you can get into an accident? Should I answer a bus? Because a bus could get blown up, Rahman al-Flan, as unfortunately it has been. So he says everything is dangerous, physically dangerous or spiritually dangerous. So you have to take the steps that you'll use it in a right way. But that Rabbi Yashiv said, but it doesn't mean you asher it legamri. That makes sense to me. But there are kanaim that go the other way. Yeah.
Is there any makar
Yeah. So it is brought down in some svarim that whistling attracts shadim, and it's not a proper thing. On the other hand, there are achrayim that say there is no real makar, meaning it's recorded, but it became a tradition in Eastern Europe not to whistle, but that was actually based on chukos hagoyim, meaning it started off as a superstition emanating from non-Jewish cultures. You have to understand. I mean, we don't like to say this or realize this, but there were certain practices that simple Jews engaged in that they actually picked up from the Goyim. And then, once Jews were doing it, so some books, some Swarm of Minhagim will read, Minhag Yisrael, Kach v'Kach. But the origin of the Minhag might mamish be Chukas HaGoyim, and I think they bring whistling is an example of that. Another example, which is interesting, Rambam Kanevsky said this, the ceremony of Hakamas Matzeva, which, from people do all the time. That's the ceremony where, well, in Eretz Yisrael it's after Shiva, in America it's after a whole year of Avelis. They have a ceremony where they put up the headstone, they put up the Matzeva, and it's covered with the cloth, and they say some Tehillim, and then they pull off the Matzeva. So whenever someone asked Rav Chaim Kanievsky, like, what Tehillim do you say at Hakamas Matzeva? His answer is, there's no such thing as Hakamas Matzeva. You're mechuyev to have a Matzeva, you are mechuyev to have a Matzeva, but there was no ceremony. You can have the workers do it. In other words, there was no concept, I have to be there when there's a Matzeva. He says the whole idea of Hakamas Matzeva was Chukais HaGoyim. According to that, not only is there no chiyuv, according to that, it might even be usher to do. Okay, but the Matzah, the minhag today is to do it. A third example, again, people will argue with me, is the Shlissel Challah thing. You heard of this minhag that after Pesach, the first Shabbos after Pesach, so a challah, actually it's a machlokes, how you do it even. Either you bake the challah with a key in it, a metal key in it, or you shape the challah in the shape of a key. So there are actually different deos of how to do shlissel. The word shlissel is Yiddish for key. Now, some Sifrei Chasidus will say there's a whole marker of opening up the gates of heaven after Pesach, bringing down Gula into the world, etc., etc. But many people have said, I don't want to say for sure, that Shlissel Challah was a Ukrainian Christian custom connected with Easter in whatever way it was, and some Jews just liked it, it looked nice, and they adopted it. And then, Achar HaMaisa, the Hasidim want to give like a deep meaning to something that was a Ukrainian folk superstition. Now, maybe it's the same process as Nigunim, right? We talked about the fact that they took the Nigunim of the Goyim and they made them holy and elevated. Maybe this might be the same thing. Technically, it's not a stira. Something might have a certain origin as a non-Jewish custom, but then it gets sanctified and redefined. I don't know. But the Shlissel Challah is another example of the Chukos HaGoyim. And whistling, it's also said there's no makar really that it's improper. Yeah.
It's interesting how in the Parsha Avraham and Sarah have like almost like a machlokas of like what to do with Yishmael. And so 2 points. One, first is that it's very interesting how on one hand when it comes to Yishmael, Avraham seems reluctant and also like more patient, but when it comes to Lot, he tells him like to go into this part of that's just A. And B was that I've heard other people say also that like at least in this incident with Avraham and Sarah, you see how many times there's tension or there's discord between husband and wife. Like the wife is always right because God always sided. So I was wondering here, I guess, what implications that has. Like,
Ma'isa Avai Simin Labanim. Okay.
Exactly. What implications does this have for like Shalom Ma'isa?
Yeah. Well, the problem was this. The problem was, with Avram's perspective, is he really didn't know what Yishmael's status was until the Bris Milah, because Hashem promised Avram, I will make you a great nation, and your seed will be K'Keichli Hashemayim. Now, at the age of 86, he has one son, Yishmael. So he feels he has to work with this, because this is the divine promise. And now it turns out it's not the divine promise, etc. And that's what Sarah was able to recognize. But that would be the nafkamina. Lot, Avram befriended, he took care of, he was makarev, but he knew that Lot would not be the bearer of the bris that Hashem made with Avram. Yishmael, there was a good chance he might be the bearer of the bris, so he has to work with him. In terms of Sarah and Avram, it's interesting. The Netziv points out the marriage, I mean, maybe it's not for us to judge marriages, but the marriage of Avraham and Sarah was a very, very different type of marriage than the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. Sarah and Avraham were kind of equal in the sense that if Sarah had a problem, she just stated her position. Rivka could not bring things up in that way. With Esav, when there's the problem with Yaakov and Esav, so Rivka has to create harama, disguises, tricks, and the like. She couldn't just have a direct conversation with Yitzchak saying, hey, Esav's a bad guy, he shouldn't get the brachas. So you see a whole different approach. And the Nesiv actually says that Rivka was in awe of Yitzchak. Rivka was almost a little scared of Yitzchak in the sense, number one, the age difference was very, very, I mean, that's superficial, but the age difference was very significant. Yitzchak got married at 40, and according to Chazal, Rivka was 3. So there was he married her as almost a baby. So she looked at him more like a parent, but more spiritually than its sivtainus, that because Yitzchak was niskadesh as a korban, he was like a malach. He was not connected to this world, and therefore there was more of a pachad, as opposed to Avraham and Sarah. They went through everything together. And because they went through everything together, they were kind of equal in the ability of Sarah to express her positions. And so it's an interesting family dynamic.
In marriage in general, I guess we should always be deciding like that. Like the wife is always right in that sense. Or?
Well, I wouldn't say wife is always right. I mean, Sarah is not just an average wife, obviously, but it depends how you define. Chazal say women have what's called bina yesera. Bina Yesera, an extra level of understanding, an extra level of intuition. So, I think that puts a lot on the side of the woman in terms of paying attention. What do they say? I heard from Rav Kalman Rosenbaum. He says, a man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck of the house. So therefore, the head goes wherever the neck turns, right? So let's say, the man is the head, but the neck. In fact, another chazal. This is a beautiful shot. Actually, it fits the words very well. It says, "Ezeu isha keshera." What is a kosher woman? What is a good woman? Oisa ritzayin baila. So the standard translation is she does what her husband wants. That's what it literally means. She does whatever her husband wants. Some teach it this way. Oisa ritzayin baila is she creates what her husband wants. Oisa, she fashions it, she creates it. Right? She makes him understand what it is that he should want. And that's called an Isha Kashera. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this Osamech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.